A systematic review published in the British Medical Journal analysed 9 separate cohort studies spanning the United States, Scandinavia, and Europe. The researchers used wrist-worn accelerometers, not self-reported data, to measure actual physical activity in 44,370 adults. What they found was this: 150 minutes per week of moderate-intensity aerobic exercise was associated with a 27% lower risk of dying from any cause, compared to people who were largely inactive. And the effect followed a dose-response curve. More was better, up to a point. If you are over 55 and trying to decide where to put your energy when it comes to exercise, this paper gives you one of the clearest answers in the current literature. In this video, we will cover exactly what the study measured and how, what the dose-response relationship looks like across different activity levels, why the intensity zone described in this research, what exercise physiologists call Zone 2, may be particularly relevant for this age group, and 3 concrete steps you can take this week. Quick note before we continue: this is educational content based on published research, not medical advice. Talk to your physician before changing your exercise regimen, especially if you have cardiovascular or musculoskeletal history. Now, the study. By age 55, the statistics on physical inactivity become difficult to ignore. Fewer than 1 in 4 adults over 55 meet the World Health Organization guideline of 150 minutes of moderate activity per week. The long-term consequences: elevated cardiovascular risk, accelerated muscle loss, higher all-cause mortality, are well documented in epidemiology. What has been harder to pin down is the specific dose. How much, exactly? At what intensity? And the research quality has historically been limited by a persistent problem: people are poor reporters of their own physical activity. They overestimate duration, misremember intensity, and conflate occasional vigorous effort with sustained moderate effort over time. The paper we are examining today addressed that limitation directly. This was a harmonized meta-analysis, meaning the research team pooled individual-level raw data from 9 existing cohorts, rather than combining published summary statistics. Each of those 9 cohorts had measured physical activity using wrist-worn accelerometers worn continuously for at least 7 days. That is the methodological distinction that separates this study from the hundreds of questionnaire-based studies that preceded it. Accelerometers do not lie or misremember. They record movement intensity as a continuous signal across every waking hour of the measurement period. The 9 cohorts were drawn from Sweden, Norway, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Participants were community-dwelling adults, meaning people not living in care facilities and without mobility-limiting conditions at baseline. Mean ages varied across cohorts, ranging from roughly 50 to 80 years. Follow-up periods extended from 5 to 13 years depending on the cohort. During those follow-up periods, 3,451 deaths occurred. That number of events is what gives a study statistical power. It is the denominator behind every hazard ratio reported in the results section. The exposure variable was total volume of moderate to vigorous physical activity, measured in MET minutes per week. A MET, or metabolic equivalent of task, is a unit of energy expenditure relative to sitting quietly. Brisk walking registers at roughly 3.5 to 4 METs. Moderate cycling is around 5 METs. The researchers divided participants into 5 activity level groups and estimated all-cause mortality hazard ratios for each group compared to the least active reference group. They adjusted for age, sex, body mass index, smoking, alcohol use, and prior cardiovascular disease or cancer diagnoses. This is where the concept of Zone 2 enters the picture. Zone 2 is a term from endurance sports coaching describing moderate intensity aerobic effort, specifically the range where your heart rate sits between approximately 60 and 70% of your maximum, and where you could sustain a conversation but would clearly notice the effort. It corresponds directly to the moderate intensity range, 3 to 6 METs, that this meta-analysis found to be beneficial. The reason exercise physiologists increasingly focus on Zone 2 for adults over 55 specifically has to do with metabolic substrate utilization and cardiovascular adaptation without excessive recovery burden. We will return to this in the takeaways. Here are the results. Adults achieving 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity had a hazard ratio of 0.73 for all-cause mortality. That is a 27% lower risk of death during follow-up compared to inactive adults. The 95% confidence interval was 0.68 to 0.77. That interval does not cross 1.0, meaning the finding is statistically significant and estimated with reasonable precision across the pooled dataset. The dose-response analysis showed the relationship was not a flat line. Adults achieving 300 minutes per week had a hazard ratio of approximately 0.70, representing roughly a 30% lower mortality risk. Beyond 300 minutes, additional benefit continued to accrue but at a meaningfully diminishing rate. The greatest relative gain comes from moving from 0 to 150 minutes per week. The incremental benefit of extending from 150 to 300 minutes is real but smaller. Beyond 300 minutes, the curve flattens considerably. This has practical implications for how you should think about return on investment for your exercise time. A secondary finding from the same analysis deserves attention. Sedentary time, defined as accelerometer-measured sitting or lying behavior during waking hours, was independently associated with higher all-cause mortality even after statistically accounting for physical activity levels. Adults sitting more than 10 hours per day showed significantly higher mortality risk than those sitting less, independent of whether they otherwise exercised. The authors note that exercise and sedentary behavior appear to operate through at least partially distinct biological pathways. The implication: exercise does not fully cancel the effects of prolonged sitting. Now for the limitations of this study. The first and most important is that this is observational evidence, not a randomized controlled trial. Even using objective accelerometers rather than questionnaires, this design cannot establish causality with certainty. People who exercise more may differ from inactive people in dozens of ways the statistical adjustments could not fully capture. This is called residual confounding. Wealthier, more educated, less chronically ill individuals are more likely to exercise regularly, and those same characteristics independently predict lower mortality. The measured effect may include a contribution from these unmeasured factors. A second limitation is reverse causation. Some participants in the inactive group may have been inactive because of undiagnosed illness, which later progressed to death. The researchers applied a 2-year lag period, excluding deaths in the first 2 years of follow-up, to reduce this problem. But this mitigation cannot fully eliminate reverse causation in an observational design. A third limitation involves the accelerometers themselves. Wrist-worn devices cannot perfectly distinguish moderate walking from cycling, and cannot accurately capture activities where arm movement does not reflect true metabolic effort, such as swimming or using a stationary bike. A fourth caveat is generalizability. The 9 cohorts in this analysis were predominantly of European and North American origin. Whether the same dose-response relationship holds across populations with different baseline health status, dietary patterns, or cultural norms around movement is not fully established from this dataset. The researchers acknowledged all of these limitations explicitly in their discussion, which is itself a mark of rigor. 3 takeaways from the evidence. First, if you are currently doing less than 150 minutes per week of moderate aerobic activity, that is the evidence-supported benchmark to aim for. Not in a single session. Spread across 3 to 5 days per week, it is roughly 30 minutes of moderate effort on most days. At Zone 2 intensity, that is brisk walking, easy cycling, recreational swimming, or light jogging at a pace where you can speak in full sentences but feel the effort. Before significantly changing your exercise volume or intensity, particularly if you have any history of cardiovascular disease, arrhythmia, or joint problems, have a conversation with your physician about what is appropriate for your situation. Second, if you are already meeting 150 minutes per week, the data support working toward 300 minutes. The additional 3 to 4 percentage points of estimated mortality risk reduction are meaningful. 300 minutes of Zone 2 activity across a week is achievable without specialized equipment. Brisk walking, cycling, swimming, or any activity that brings you to that conversational but effortful intensity counts. What matters is consistency and the right intensity level, not any particular modality or gym membership. Third, treat sedentary time as a separate variable, not something offset by exercise alone. If your day involves 6 or more hours of seated work or screen time, the data from this meta-analysis suggests that a morning exercise session does not fully neutralize that exposure. Brief interruptions of prolonged sitting, a 5 to 10 minute walk after each 90 minutes at a desk, have been studied in the sedentary behavior literature as a plausible approach. This is not a medical prescription. It is a variable worth discussing with your physician in the context of your overall cardiovascular and metabolic assessment. To summarize, a harmonized meta-analysis of 9 cohorts with 44,000 adults, using objective accelerometry data, found 150 minutes per week of moderate-intensity physical activity was associated with a 27% lower all-cause mortality risk compared to inactive adults. The benefit extends toward 300 minutes per week, then plateaus. Zone 2 intensity, conversational but effortful moderate aerobic effort, corresponds to the intervention range showing benefit. Sedentary time is an independent risk variable. This is educational content, not medical advice. Always consult your physician before changing your exercise regimen. Studies are preliminary, individual responses vary. If you found this useful, our free guide, How to Read Your Biomarker Panel at 55+, includes a section on cardiovascular fitness markers. Link is in the description. New evidence reviews publish every Tuesday and Friday.